was a kid, the basement always scared me more than the attic did. I don't really know why. Most people seem to be afraid of attics because of the isolation, but there was something about our basement that really got to me. If I had to guess, I'd say it was because our basement was slightly unconventional. For starters, it wasn't just an open concrete box. The previous owners had built these strange, waist-high concrete retaining walls that cut through the center of the space like a maze. The furnace and the water heater were positioned right in the dead center of this labyrinth, so the space was broken up by this massive, loud machinery and these concrete dividers. The pipes were low-hanging and wrapped in crumbling white insulation, and there was no pattern to where they dipped down. The result was that you couldn't stand in any one place down there and have a clear line of sight. My dad used to joke that one day one of us would turn a corner, get turned around by the furnace noise, and never find the stairs again. So, you can imagine why a basement like that would be scary to a little kid. Story 1, The Sleepwalker. It happened during the school week. I'm not sure exactly how old I was, but I was definitely in middle school. I woke up one morning and noticed my shins were freezing. I pulled the covers back and realized my feet were dirty. The bottoms were covered in this gray, powdery grime, and there was this fine layer of grit stuck to my ankles that I couldn't explain. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at them, trying to figure out what had happened. I hadn't gone outside the night before. I'd just gone to bed and woken up with filthy feet. I didn't give it too much thought beyond that. I just scrubbed my feet in the tub until the water ran gray and went about my day. Things only escalated from there, though. A few days later, I found an object in my room that definitely didn't belong there. It was a heavy, rusted pipe wrench, the kind my dad kept on his workbench in the basement. I had absolutely no memory of bringing it upstairs, and when I asked my mom about it, she just assumed I'd been messing around with my dad's tools. I told her I hadn't, but she didn't seem concerned. She just took the wrench back downstairs, told me to stay out of the toolbox, and that was that. Then it happened again. I woke up one morning and found a glass jar filled with old, rusty screws sitting on my nightstand. This heavy mason jar that I vaguely recognized from the shelf behind the washing machine. This time I was sure I definitely hadn't brought that up. I would have remembered carrying a heavy glass jar up 2 flights of stairs in the middle of the night. That's when things started clicking into place. The gray dust on my feet, it was concrete dust. The pipe wrench, the jar of screws. I wasn't just sleepwalking, I was sleepwalking to the basement. The realization didn't scare me right away, but it made me feel strange. The idea that I was unconsciously navigating that maze of concrete dividers and low-hanging pipes in the dark was weird. I told my parents, and they reacted exactly how you'd expect. They said sleepwalking was completely normal and that I'd probably grow out of it. To them, it was just a quirk, but to me, it was terrifying. I started dreading bedtime. I'd lie in bed for hours fighting sleep because I was terrified of what my body might do once I was unconscious. But nothing was scarier than the night it finally stopped. I woke up, only it wasn't morning. It was still dark out. It took me a few seconds to realize it, but I wasn't in my bed either. In fact, I wasn't even lying down. I was standing. That was the first thing I registered. I was standing upright on a freezing cold surface in complete darkness. For a few seconds, my brain couldn't even process it. But then the smell hit me, that damp, metallic smell of mildew and old copper. The recognition hit me like a truck. I was in the basement. The fear that washed over me was so intense that I almost couldn't breathe. I was in the basement in the middle of the night in pitch-black darkness. I couldn't see a single thing, not the stairs, not the furnace, not the dividers, just absolute impenetrable black. And to make matters worse, I had no idea where in the basement I was. Was I near the stairs? Or was I all the way in the back corner, by the sump pump? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, too scared to move. I knew there were obstacles everywhere, those concrete walls, the tools. The idea of trying to find my way back to the stairs in complete darkness was almost unthinkable. So I started moving slowly, shuffling my feet so I wouldn't trip. I was so scared that I actually started crying silently, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone down there. I don't know what was giving me that thought, but I could feel something else there with me, something on the other side of the furnace. And as soon as I had that thought, I actually heard something. There was a soft scrape from somewhere in front of me. It honestly sounded like fabric brushing against concrete, or maybe a bare foot dragging slightly. I froze. I listened. I heard the sound twice more. Scrape, scrape. And both times it sounded like it was getting closer, moving around the central block where the furnace was to cut me off. I scrambled until I hit the banister of the stairs with my hand. I crawled up those stairs on all fours, scraping my shins, moving faster than I've ever moved in my life. I burst into the kitchen, locked the basement door, and woke my parents up. I told my dad what had happened, about the darkness and the sounds. I expected him to grab a baseball bat, but he didn't. He just said the furnace makes weird noises when it expands. He offered to put a hook and eye lock on the basement door, high up where I couldn't reach it in my sleep, if it would make me feel better. I said yes, obviously. With the lock on the door, the sleepwalking did stop. But I've never been able to fully accept the explanation. The way I always ended up in the same place, the basement, never anywhere else in the house, and the shuffling sounds I heard that night. I still believe there was something down there with me. I really do. 5-second pause. Story 2, The Hidden Space. This happened when I was 16 or 17. My family lived in this massive, drafty farmhouse that had been passed down for generations. My dad grew up there, and so did his parents before him. Like most farmhouses, it had a root cellar that had been converted into a basement. It was basically a graveyard for old canning jars, broken farm equipment, and camping gear. That last one was the only reason anyone ever went down there. One summer my dad sent me down to grab the tents. I walked down the creaky wooden steps and pulled the chain to turn on the single bulb. The smell was overpowering, wet earth and rust. I started moving random boxes around looking for the gear, and I ended up making a complete mess of the place. I was checking behind the boiler, under the stairs, everywhere. As I was standing there catching my breath, I saw something that looked out of place. In one of the back corners, tucked behind the oil tank where I'd shifted a stack of old magazines, there was this box I hadn't seen before. It was a metal lockbox, painted black but chipped and rusted around the edges. It looked heavy-duty, like a fireproof document safe, but it looked older than everything else down there. Being a curious teenager, I picked it up. It wasn't locked. Inside were papers, dozens of notebooks, loose graph paper, and hand-drawn architectural plans, and they were all completely covered in handwriting. I sat down on a milk crate right there under the bare bulb and started reading. The handwriting was difficult to decipher, spidery and aggressive, but I recognized it. It was my grandfather's. The earliest entries were boring notes about crop rotations and weather, but as I kept reading, things got weird. The handwriting got chaotic, almost illegible. Whoever wrote this, my grandfather, had become obsessed with the basement, specifically the floor. He kept measuring it. He repeatedly documented the dimensions of the foundation, comparing them to the footprint of the house above. According to his math, the basement floor depth didn't make sense. He wrote that the sound was wrong when he walked on the southeast quadrant. He went into extreme detail about this one specific patch of concrete, describing cracks, moisture levels, even the temperature of the dirt. The entries got even more frantic after that. It was clear he was spending hours down there. sometimes sleeping in the basement. He started hearing sounds coming from beneath the concrete, like scratching, shifting, that sort of thing. There were timestamps. 2:14 a.m. Vibration felt for approximately 3 minutes. The more I read, the more I realized I was getting a first-hand account of someone's descent into madness. The final pages weren't even sentences anymore, just tally marks. Rows and rows of them counting something I couldn't identify. And then the entries just stopped. By the time I finished, I was shaking. The basement suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. My eyes went straight to the southeast corner the writer had been so fixated on. And the moment I realized there were actually fresh-looking cracks in the concrete there, I felt sick. I walked over and examined the floor. The cracks seemed to line up exactly with the stress fractures my grandfather had drawn. I could picture him down here pressing his ear to the cold concrete in a fit of lunacy. It felt like he was still down there with me. I grabbed the black box and went straight to my dad in the garage. He was shocked. He looked through the papers and his face went pale. He knew his father had been eccentric in his later years, but he didn't know about this. My dad went down to investigate, and I went with him. I felt safer with him there. He inspected the corner meticulously, tapping the floor with the handle of a shovel. After a few minutes, he froze. I thought he had dismissed it, but he turned to me and said he was going to break the floor. I was shocked, but he grabbed a sledgehammer and a pickaxe and started swinging. It took him about an hour, but eventually the concrete gave way, and what we saw was horrifying. The writer had been right. It wasn't just dirt underneath. There was a void, a hollow space, maybe 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide, lined with old, rotting wood. But that wasn't even the worst part. The wooden planks lining this hidden hole were covered in markings, black charcoal lines, symbols, shapes I didn't even recognize. They covered almost every inch of the wood. They didn't look like writing. They looked like warnings or wards. My dad and I just stood there looking down into this hole in our basement floor, completely overwhelmed. We shined a light down there, but the space was empty. No tunnels, no creatures, just a sealed wooden box buried in the foundation. Things didn't end there. My dad pointed out that whoever wrote those notebooks did not seem like the type of person who would neatly organize everything in a lockbox. Compulsive behavior doesn't usually end with tidy archival work. That meant someone else had compiled the collection. My dad realized it must have been his mother, my grandmother. She must have found the writings after my grandfather died and hid them to protect his memory, or maybe to hide the truth. My dad poured fresh concrete into that hole the very next day. He filled it all the way to the top, burying the markings and the void forever. As for me, I don't really know what to make of it. I used to think my grandfather was just insane, but there were things in those pages, predictions about where the cracks would form, that were 100% accurate. And sometimes, when I visit my parents and go down to that basement, I swear I can hear a faint scratching coming from beneath the new patch of concrete, like something is trying to dig its way back